Welcome to segment 7 of 9 of my spiritual awakening. Well, last week we were talking about my little walk from Santa Monica to Torrance that I was kind of forced into taking. Well, when I left Venice, just before I left Venice, I started to hitchhike with my big cross and my bag, and I got picked up by a car in Venice, and it was an older guy. He had glasses, and I started telling him about the cross and my beliefs and stuff, and wound up he was only going so far, and had to let me off. I think that maybe I kind of scared him a little, I don't know, but the funniest part about that was I got weird vibrations about that guy, that maybe he was looking to pick some guy up to kill him or something. He might have been a serial killer, I don't know. Just kind of weird vibrations, but he kind of smiled and let me off after just driving a little ways in Venice. And then I walked from Venice. I started my walk, and I guess it was around midnight or after midnight that I was in Watts and South Central LA. I think I may have even rested a little bit, tried to sleep, but I couldn't sleep at some point before I got there. I remember while I was walking in Watts that there was a group of young blacks that I heard one guy say to the other guy, "Don't bother him, he's okay." And I didn't know this person. Maybe they saw me on the Venice boardwalk before, or maybe they were saying that the guy said it because he saw the big cross that I was carrying, and maybe they were afraid I was a psycho, or that because of the cross that there was a holy thing going on, and then not to mess with me. I prefer to think the latter, of course. And when 6 o'clock came, 6 in the morning, the buses started to run again where I was at, and I took a bus from down Western Avenue to the rest of the way from about where it was, Century Boulevard, maybe Century and Western, and took that down to Torrance and to my friend's house. By the end of '81, I let my money run out because I had gotten some threatening phone calls from United California Bank because of my MasterCard that I couldn't make payments on anymore because I didn't have a regular income. And whenever I did work temp, they would attach they threatened to attach my pay. And so what I wound up doing was just not working anymore. I let my money run out, and I had a place I rented on Hoover Boulevard in LA, 334 3/4 or 343 3/4. I don't know which, but because of the numbers, the 34, 43, and the 3/4, 43 adding up to Jesus Christ, I thought it was rather interesting that I would wind up a place with those numbers. It was a garage that this woman was renting out that was turned into a little apartment, but it was a garage. And if you forgive me for the bugs, there's little bugs floating around here. I try to end this as quick as I can to combat the bugs. While I was at that garage, living there, I used to sometimes go to sleep with my radio on, and or I'd have it tuned, I'd have it wake up to a clock radio. I don't remember which it was, one or the other. I woke up one morning to a story about scientists in Florida having made a discovery, and then this was in late '81, beginning of '82, that scientists had made some sort of discovery about, where they had a theory about all forms of life emitting certain radio frequencies. And that made me think about the seed movement again, as a possible way in which that those seeds were manipulated by someone. Not someone of this earth. I was figuring if there was such a thing that they're just finding out about in the early 80s, and it's a theory about wavelengths, all forms of life. Well, seeds are the beginnings of life, and they had been in water germinating, so they were starting to live, the seeds were. So they must have, if you were a higher intelligence life form, an alien from another planet, and you probably have knowledge of what the wavelengths or the waves were that were emitted by those seeds. And if you wanted to move those seeds that were in water, you could probably develop some sort of computer program and transmitter and send a message down to where the seeds were, to manipulate what they did in the water. And that is possibly how the seeds moved and spelled out what they spelled, the I, the M, the W, and the arrow. It made sense to me, and I don't think that we had the capability of doing that here on planet Earth, but I do believe that a higher life form would probably be able to develop something like that if they had a purpose for doing something like that. And of course, the purpose would be to get that message to me, that I would eventually discover what the W was, the W part of the message. I had already by then discovered the I, the M, and the arrow, but the W part I still hadn't known at that point when I heard that story. But I was soon to find out what the W was later that year, later in '82. Anyway, my landlady was named Susan, and she had some kids, 2 or 3 kids, and she had this red letter Christian Bible that she let me look at from 1907. And that's where I found out about the alternate readings. There were the translations in Isaiah 53 that some of the words were in question as to what they actually were when translated. One of the words was later on in Isaiah 53 where the word death is in most versions of the Bible. The alternate reading was plural, deaths, in his deaths instead of in his death. And in his deaths would make more sense to me, because I felt that it was about the first and second coming. It was about both comings of Jesus, not just the first coming. And one being Jesus, the other being Christ. The other part that was, of course, different was the thing like I had mentioned earlier in Isaiah 53:3. Well, the alternate reading, which was he hid, as it were, his face from us, that made me believe that I was Jesus when I read that, because of the Holy Ghost had come in the name of Jesus Christ hadn't been established yet. Yeah, it was. I believed I was Jesus at that time, and when I read the Bible in '81, in early '81, earlier that year, and was it '81 that I read it earlier in '81, or no? It was '80. It was earlier in '80 that I had read the Bible. Yeah, when I read the Bible in 1980, and after I'd finished the biography, and when I went out to see Robert Gist, that's when I first read the Bible from beginning to end. And it was there that I saw in the Jehovah Bible, he hid his face from us in Isaiah 53:3, which made me believe that, wow, I'd just written about that guy with my biography, and that was me. And then I later found out that was supposed to have been written about Jesus. But most Bibles say we hid our faces from him instead of he hid his face from us. But I had seen it the Jehovah way. He hid, as it were, his face from us. Now, Susan let me stay. My money was running out at the end of March, and I had told her I was going to go to the Venice Boardwalk and with a sign written backwards and try to get, and go on a fast and try to get my story told and try to get a movie deal. And I was supposed to go on April 1st, but it was raining on April 1st in '82 in LA, and it was raining on April 2nd. So she let me stay a couple extra days until the rain stopped. And April 3rd was a Saturday, and the rain had stopped, and that was the day that I went to the Venice Boardwalk with this sign I'm going to show you. And in fact, if you can can see the sign. It's the sign that you see underneath me in this presentation, but in fact, I won't even need to show this. I won't need to hold this sign up right now because I have inserted it on the bottom of me, underneath me. That's the sign that I took to the Venice Boardwalk. And I can read it. It says, it's written backwards, and it says, Yesna is the result of Isaiah 53. My life story is written in 5 books over the last 2.5 years through the Spirit of Yahweh, God. I'm engaged in a water fast to secure a movie deal. You can help me. F.F. Coppola, R. Williams, and R. Gist. Francis Ford Coppola, Robin Williams, and Robert Gist. I wanted Robin Williams at the time to play me, but now so many years have gone by, he couldn't play me at that age in the 30s anymore. And Robert Gist has passed on, so it'd have to be a different director. As far as Coppola goes, he's still alive, and he could still be a producer of this film, or these films. Let's see. So my first day on the boardwalk was April 3rd, and it wasn't of my choosing, it was Lorraine's choice. Well, I didn't know this at the time. There was an article written later over a year and a half later, in December of '83, in one of the editions of the Honolulu Star Bulletin. Scientists had pinpointed the date of the crucifixion as being April 3rd in the year 33. So April 3rd, the date of the crucifixion, is what scientists said in '83, in December of '83. And my fast started on the Venice Boardwalk on April 3rd in the year of '82, a year and a half before that article came out in the Honolulu Star Bulletin. I find that kind of an interesting coincidence, if you will. Also, in early '83, I had made a prediction before even seeing that article that was in December of '83. In January of '83 or February of '83, I'd written a letter to a girl named Sabrina who was in juvie, in some sort of a home out of juvie, juvenile detention place, but a home that she got placed in, not a foster home, but a place where she was being kept. And I had written a letter to her, and in the letter I made a prediction of the crucifixion as being April 3rd based on my calculations and my symbolism that I associated with April 3rd in the year 33. Then in '85, I read a book called The Great Pyramid Decoded that was written in '71, but I read it in '85, and I have the receipt for when I bought that book, by the way, in '85. And in that book, based on an inch to a year to an inch, the pyramidologists believe that the year 33 was the date of the crucifixion. Also, another source. Later on, a couple of years after this fast in Venice, I discovered that when I was working on my own calendar, a Hebrew calendar, 101-year Hebrew calendar from 1900 to 2001. I put together this Hebrew calendar based on a formula that was given in the downtown library in Los Angeles. And I figured out how to calculate the Hebrew days of the year based on that formula. And I made a 101-year calendar, and I checked the validity of the calendar, or the accuracy of the calendar, by comparing it to comparing the dates of Passover to the dates of Passover in the Hebrew Union Library in Los Angeles. And they were accurate, they were correct. And I discovered during that time that the Great Sabbath, the Hebrew Great Sabbath, was my birthday in 1945. I was born after sundown. By then I had sent away for my birth certificate and found out that I had been born at 8:45 p.m. in Greenfield, Mass. Dr. Freeman brought me into the world. And It was after sundown on a Friday night, which made it the Sabbath, and it just happened to be the Great Sabbath in 1945. I believe it was the 10th of Nisan. And some Jewish mystics believe that the Messiah returns on the Great Sabbath. And it also turns out that if my father's time of birth was after sundown, he also was born on the Great Sabbath. Because in 1912, he was born on March 29th, a Friday. And if it was after sundown, that also, March 29th in 1912, was the Great Sabbath. So if he was born after sundown, we don't know, when it didn't say on his birth certificate. If he was, then just like me, we were both born on the Hebrew Great Sabbath. And there's something in the Bible about Jesus saying, when you've seen the Son, you've seen the Father. Now, if it turns out that he was born before sundown, then he would not have been born on the Great Sabbath. However, if that were the case, in the year I was born, in 1945, his birthday, March 29th, would have been Passover. So that's kind of an interesting connection. Either way, there's an interesting connection relating to father and son and this whole thing. While I was on the boardwalk, I met a guy named Donnie, and I'm going to read from a play I wrote, 13 Slow Days on a Fast, at Venice Beach, California, that I wrote after the fast. And I made up this conversation, but it was based on what he had said, so it wasn't really, it may not have been word for word, because I couldn't remember word for word, but all the important details are in there. And I'm going to read that in the form of a little scene between me and him, a little dialogue, and I'll use a little different voice for him. And you'll see something rather interesting. On Halloween, after many strange occurrences since I'd arrived in Vermont, I discovered that my last name backwards had a two-end version of Essene enclosed by Yah. And then I went on to say that it started me believing once again that I was Jesus. And then he said, that's very interesting. In a way, it's kind of weird, because I spent 6 months on the funny farm for the same thing. I had taken the PCP and thought that I was the Son of Man. What was it like in the institution? They kept us drugged most of the time on Thorazine. What's that do for you? I guess it kept us from resisting or getting violent. You mean that you thought you were the Son of Man and you were violent? Well, I wasn't violent. They gave it to me anyway. I resisted because I wasn't really crazy. If the shrinks don't see what you see, you're automatically Bozo City. Yeah, I know. I think we talk to the same shrinks. I'm out on mental disability now. It's funny that you should mention Halloween of '79. I remember what I was doing that night. I was on the beach in Long Beach and with a friend near the Queen Mary. Queen Mary, she's my friend. I do believe I'll go see her again. Imitation of Bob Dylan. Pretty bad. Anyway, that night my friend and I were reading Revelations in the Bible backwards. It was really making sense. Suddenly we spotted two pulsating lights in the sky. They weren't like anything we'd ever seen before. I figured that they were trying to distract us from reading Revelations. So I started reading more intense-like. Now that's pretty amazing. Here I am, 3,000 miles away on the same night, back east, discovering my last name backwards, having an Essene enclosed by Yah, and starting to believe I'm Jesus again. And while I was interpreting the last book of Revelation, the last chapter of Revelation, and he's back in California reading Revelations backwards. He said Revelations, it's actually Revelation. Reading Revelation backwards and seeing two UFOs. Now, to me, that smacks of aliens. That's what that smacks of. The 8th day of my fast, I caught a cold, and because because it was raining, and I saw this dog being tied, that had been tied up out front of a restaurant near the sidewalk cafe. Well, the two girls were inside eating breakfast. It started to rain while they were eating breakfast. And so I went over with my little blue umbrella and covered up the dog. It wasn't big enough of an umbrella to cover us both up, so I got a little wet. And the wetness or the dampness, I guess, probably caused me to have a cold, seeing as how my resistance was probably pretty weak at that time. And the girls never thanked me, by the way, when they came out of the restaurant for protecting their dog from the rain. But I ran into a doctor at one point, after that, and told him about my taking vitamin C, and he said that unless you have something to eat, vitamin C doesn't do anything. So I stopped taking the vitamin C after 11 days, and 2 days later is actually when I got the cold, where it really got bad. So it took a little while for me to get that cold. So whether it was the dampness or what, maybe the dampness didn't cause it. I think it did, or at least it contributed to it, but also stopping the vitamin C might have also contributed to it, even though the doctor said that the vitamin C wasn't doing me any good. It just seems odd that right after, a couple days after I stopped taking the vitamin C, I got a bad cold. And at that point, I decided to regroup and go out to the desert, to my parents' house, and that's where I wound up declaring bankruptcy. I borrowed a couple $100 from my parents and paid them back eventually. Not very long after I borrowed it, once I went back to work. But while I was at my parents', I did make an interesting discovery, and that was what the W was. In the dictionary, the big giant dictionary they had, the Webster's New International Unabridged Second Edition, had who wrote Webster's New International Dictionary, Second Edition Unabridged. Yeah. It had an alphabets, I think the Greek, the Hebrew, and excuse me, the Greek and the Hebrew and the Arabic or something, English. But it had the Greek. The Greek was the key one, and it showed that the letter W in the Greek alphabet was the last letter. It was Omega, and Jesus in the Bible said that I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. So now if you go back and look at that seed movement, you got the message as being, I am Omega Truth. Truth of the narrow. I am Omega Truth. I am last truth. And it was on Mary Magdalene Day, and I was 33 1/3 years old. The end of a biblical generation for me. Do you see the symbolism? I mean, if I pound on the symbols any harder, I'll break the sticks.